Mildenhall Air Force Base for a grand period of about 3 months. Who's ever heard of Mildenhall Air Force Base here? Well, praise God, several of us have. That was fun. But this is a blessing because I'm among not only friends but brothers and sisters in Christ. So thank you for having me. It's a joy and a privilege to be with you. Well, now that my one joke has been shot, let me tell you a little bit about myself, very, very briefly, just to let you know why I'm here. I'm here because I was a Jehovah's Witness. How many people, are there some here that have been Jehovah's Witnesses? Ooh, more than I thought. Okay. A goodly number of us, maybe half, have walked the Watchtower Mile. How many people have pioneered and... we've walked more than just 1 mile, haven't we? Yes, worn out a little shoe leather, huh? Well, I'm a former Jehovah's Witness, and I left the organization in 1974, 1 year before Armageddon didn't happen. But I had briefly gotten in, actually, just for a few months because I was all excited about Paradise Earth. The reason why I was excited about Paradise Earth is because I was ignorant. I thought if you got a whole bunch of Jehovah's Witnesses, perhaps millions of them, to populate the planet, we'd have a paradise. But after being out for a while and noticing that really true sisterhood and brotherhood and Christianity is outside of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's influence, I don't think there's a paradise inside Jehovah's Witnesses. I was grown up as a Jehovah's Witness, so I know what it's like to be a kid as a Jehovah's Witness, and I know a little bit of what it's like to be an adult as a Jehovah's Witness in the mid-'70s. And, of course, I lived all that with all kinds of other folks who did the same thing, so I'm talking about knowing kids and knowing adults as Jehovah's Witnesses of all ages. So I got to know them personally. Since I have left Jehovah's Witnesses, I have interviewed approximately around 1,500 people who either were Jehovah's Witnesses at the time of the interview or had left the movement. And I've asked them very similar questions. Now, the topic tonight I'm speaking on is child custody issues, and I've titled it Cruel and Unusual Punishment, because I do believe that in the long run, and perhaps in many cases in the short run, in the daily routine of things, being a Jehovah's Witness can be very cruel to yourself, to others around you, and psychologically draining. And it is a punishment to undergo that. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some happy people among Jehovah's Witnesses. I found at least a couple of them right here on this cover here. A united, happy family. All right. So at least the message is that if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're going to be smiling at least most of the time, if not all the time, about being a Jehovah's Witness. So, I know that was the message, and I also know that I wasn't one of those people smiling all the time, all right? But I'm not here to pick on Jehovah's Witnesses in the sense that I'm saying, well, okay, their group is perhaps if you have a happiness barometer, a little bit less on the level than, say, the Mormons, because the Mormons sing better. Okay, or some other, well, they do. I mean, my goodness, the Kingdom Hall songs. What can one say? But in the issues that we're going to be talking about, which is lifestyle issues, I think that when we start looking at it a little bit more closely than perhaps some of us do, or particularly as we were Jehovah's Witnesses, that we'll see some things that are dark, very sad. Well, after I got out of Jehovah's Witnesses in 1974, I wanted to pursue a question that was just getting to me every single day. And the question was, how did this happen to me? You know, how did this happen to me? I'd been a college student. I was a year away from law school. I thought I could, think a little bit about what was going on. But here I had left everything, decided to sell my business, not go on to school anymore, so I could pioneer for 18 months to make it into Armageddon, past Armageddon into paradise. Now, why would I do something like that? And again, I think it had to do with believing that this organization was a group, even though I really didn't feel it, of happy people who Jehovah had blessed. I really, truly believe that. And so when I talk tonight, I want you to realize I'm not criticizing Jehovah's Witnesses as people, as individuals. Some of the finest people I've ever known have been Jehovah's Witnesses. I like to say have been, because I like to think that they too had that joy of exiting the Jehovah's Witnesses, and many of them for Christ. So I did find out a lot about the history. I traveled the country. I talked to old, what's known as Russellites, people who had been actually in the congregations of Charles Taze Russell, and back in the turn of the century. And I caught them generally when they were like 90 years old. And I received a lot of the literature that they had, and they referred me to places where I could get a lot of the older material. We amassed an enormous library, probably the world's largest library of literature outside of the Watchtower headquarters. So I immersed myself into this. I really wanted to know the history and what makes this tick. And then all kinds of subjects came up. And I've been doing this for about 10 years, writing on a number of different subjects, and Dr. Walter Martin of Christian Research Institute gave us a ring. Anybody heard of Dr. Walter Martin? Okay, several of us have. He was known as the Bible Answer Man, and he was truly a gifted apologist for the faith. And he called me up because he was going to testify in a child custody matter in Florida. And he needed, CRI would constantly call Witness Inc. for old documentation, particularly on various subjects, and even on the New Light stuff. And he wanted me to put a package together for him so he could testify on child custody issues, so he'd have some documents and kind of an outline to work from, because that wasn't something that he'd been talking about very much. So I decided I'd do that. Before I knew it, as usual, whatever project I was working on, I was getting more immersed into it. And I got interested in this thing. And as I was getting interested in it, I received a call from somebody who wanted me to testify in a child custody matter, having nothing to do, of course, with what Dr. Martin had been doing. And so I had I added to my arsenal, you might say, of information, and I scooted over there and testified. And I was on the stand for about half a day. And that testimony is in our book, Cruel and Unusual Punishment, exactly as I testified. It was the first time I'd ever been in a courtroom, and so I felt a little bit uneasy in the beginning, but I actually got to like it as I noticed that the attorney on the other side was extremely frustrated the more questions he was asking, because we did, in fact, have the proof of the lifestyle. So that was mid-'80s. Here we are now into the next millennium, and I've worked on about 125 child custody matters, including some hospital blood litigation and similar types of cases. And I find the general theme of this lifestyle of Jehovah's Witnesses applying to each of these cases. In other words, witnesses are truly monolithic in their lifestyle. If a Jehovah's Witness says he believes in something, the next Jehovah's Witness who comes into that courtroom is going to say basically the same thing. Makes my job fairly easy. So I've noticed that. But who are Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, of course, they're in this spiritual paradise, but as they claim, but they are also people undergoing an enormous divorce rate problem right now. Now, I can't say what the statistic is. All I can say is what my experience is. And through all these interviews, we find that there are broken families in enormity in the Kingdom Halls. And when I was hanging around the Jehovah's Witnesses, we'd generally have somewhere around 2/3 women. Is that a general thing you found in these Kingdom Halls? All right. And we'd find that half of them, or 30% at least, had undergone divorce or were involved in getting a divorce. So, and that was then. I think now, with the divorce rate, like in the United States right now, we're running at about a 60% divorce rate. I don't know how it is in England. But I think that's magnified when you get a non-Jehovah's Witness and a Jehovah's Witness in a situation. You're going to even see worse than that. So they are seeing a tremendous problem. The main thing, I think, when we talk about Jehovah's Witnesses, is we've got to talk about an authoritarian structure which disallows independent thinking among the Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what makes it monolithic. There is a guide in Brooklyn headquarters called the Governing Body, which is now, I believe, up to 13 men. I think that's the latest count. They are the ones who set the lifestyle for Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think the biggest problem is that many people can't handle that lifestyle. So we're talking about a group of people which are generally emotionally non-healthy. Even people who would be able to handle stressful situations, if you give them that kind of situation over and over and over again, year in and year out, you see elders burn out, you see pioneers just fade away. People start attending the Kingdom Hall because of burnout, and that's happening more and more and more. One of the big identifiers in child custody matters is probably the big identifier for Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, if you were to think of one thing when you think of Jehovah's Witnesses, what do you think? Armageddon, right? Armageddon, the end of the world. That's the great motivator. That also gets some headway in the court. It's a doomsday organization, and we do show that to the judge. Another key factor is the children's isolation from the greater community. In fact, I would say that probably ranks right up with Armageddon, maybe even surpasses it in a number of cases I've been involved in, because the courts generally like to see that the child matures in the greater community and has opportunities. And when the child is cut off from non-Jehovah's Witness associations, these are the kinds of things that judges don't like. Manifestations of that, of course, are the lack of celebrating holidays and birthday parties and so forth, and the reasons for such, which is that if you do celebrate these things, you're, in essence, becoming part of Satan's world. Satan's world is what? All non-Jehovah's Witnesses. And again, I told you that I was ready to give up my career, my education, and in general, even though since 1992, Jehovah's Witnesses have been allowed, and may I stress allowed, to go to college, we're finding that is also continuously put down by the elders. That is not encouraged, and if a child does decide to pursue college, in the main, there are exceptions, but if they do decide to go to college, university, it is only generally for a couple of years so they can get enough education so that they can get some kind of decent part-time job. It's not what they're calling a career. Why would you want a long-time career anyway if doomsday is coming so fast? Another issue the court is interested in, which dovetails with the issue of Satan's organization being everybody but witnesses, is the fact that witnesses are unpatriotic and will not defend the country if attacked. You get a patriotic judge, and some are, and that can be a real key issue in the case, believe it or not. Last but not least, of course, and which we'll be talking about sometime tomorrow also, is the issue of the physical health being harmed by the blood transfusion policy, to the point where in a number of cases that I've had, the judge is sitting there listening to a woman who has a healthy child and talking about the death of her child. Now, can you imagine the judge recognizing that there would be no reason to be talking about the death of this child if, in fact, the child is healthy, except for one reason? It's a policy of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society to disallow blood to that child in emergency situations. Here's the quote out of the June 15th, 1991 Watchtower, page 31, which is worth quoting in full here, or at least partially, almost in full. Christians today must also be steadfast, firmly resolved not to violate divine law, even if that puts them in some jeopardy as to secular governments. The 12-year-old, quoted on the same page, which is page 17 of the Watchtower magazine, left no doubt that she would fight any court-authorized transfusion with all the strength she could muster. If a court-authorized transfusion seemed likely, a Christian might choose to avoid being accessible for such a violation of God's law. If a Christian put forth very strenuous efforts to avoid a violation of God's law on blood, authorities might consider him a lawbreaker or make him liable to prosecution. If punishment did result, the Christian could view it as suffering for the sake of righteousness. So in other words, basically, the scenario is that if you're a witness parent, you don't have a hospital that readily does no blood transfusion operations, employing blood substitutes and being highly trained in that area, within the vicinity, the immediate vicinity of an accident, let's say. What's the policy? Policy is to keep that kid out of that facility. All right? And these are the types of documents which ring loud in a judge's ear when he has to consider the physical welfare of the child. And I said last but not least, but we don't want to forget this fellowshipping issues either. This fellowshipping is, I understand there will be some discussion on that in another talk. I won't get into it heavily, just to say this. That, again, is a key area because it's a breaking up of families and an isolating an individual from his parents. If the children are baptized, many of them will decide they don't want to see daddy or mommy anymore if they leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. This is the frightening scenario which a judge has generally not entertained before. In one case I testified, the judge said this. He said, "The only thing I can tell you, I consider personally nothing more responsible than my job in deciding the welfare of these children. These children are the most battered and abused children by their lifestyles alone that I've ever had in my court." He's been a judge for 25 years. "And that I've ever been associated with, and I can tell you that right off. Child abuse is not only hitting and beating, sexually fondling, scolding in an improper manner, denying opportunities to progress in life. All these are systems of abuse." So, courts now are required by law, and a lot of attorneys don't understand this, and they're afraid to bring in religious issues into the courtroom because of the First Amendment. I'm speaking in the United States. We have freedom of religion there, as you do here, but in the United States, generally an attorney would be afraid to bring in the issue if it pertained to anything religious. If there was a religious content to that issue, he would be afraid the judge would just not hear it. Well, actually, the law requires judges to hear these issues if, in fact, they interfere with what the standard is. And the standard is the best interests of the child in the United States and in Canada particularly. So, in other words, there are certain religious practices, even though they happen to be religious, which are harmful, either harmful psychologically or harmful physically. And if those get in the way of the best interests of that kid, If he's not going to do as well under a Jehovah's Witness regimen than he would the non-Jehovah's Witness parent, because the non-Jehovah's Witness parent is not going to load him up with all these restrictions and isolation and perhaps physical endangerment, then the judge is going to lean definitely towards the non-Jehovah's Witness parent by law. So that's very helpful. But a lot of you have to fight hard in these cases to get the judges to look at that. And attorneys have to have the guts and the information to bring it into the courtroom. Well, we started testifying, and of course the Watchtower is not going to take this lying down, of course. So what they did is they put out a strategy manual. We got our hands on it, naturally. And then they revised the strategy manual, and we actually printed it. It's called Preparing for Child Custody Cases. This is their actual strategy manual for what they're going to do in child custody cases regarding the questions that are to be asked of the various parties involved in the case. I found out in 1991, 3 years after we had it, that the manual was prepared because of our testimony in court. I could understand it actually by looking at it. Glenn Howe, who was a prominent Jehovah's Witness, was very, very instrumental in creating that manual. I think that times have changed, and right now religion is being probably blasted worldwide more than it's been in the last few years, mainly because, well, speaking as an evangelical Christian, I can say we've got a pretty wimpy group in general, and we don't fight for our rights very much, and we let politicians and others run over us. That's my personal opinion. And if we can let that happen to us, and we're a fairly substantial group, then other groups are also feeling the heat, other religions. And that happens within the court system. Now, there's pros and cons to this as far as the work I do. Sometimes a judge who recognizes that religion is taking a hit kind of bends over backwards to be nice to Jehovah's Witnesses, all right? And so it's even more difficult. On the other hand, if you get a judge who just feels that these people are nutty, we're able to move with him fairly easily just by showing him some of the documentation. I hate to say it, folks, but in most of these cases, the judges are like little gods, all right? And you have to appease them, all right? And you have to recognize that no matter how much information I have, no matter if I can prove there's endangerment to this child with 6 feet of documents, that's not necessarily going to win the case. I believe in prayer, okay? When I go into that courtroom, and hopefully I've got a Christian client, we do some praying, because Jesus Christ is the one who's going to win that case, not Duane Magnani, that's for sure, or the attorney. Shortly after 85, when I started doing some heavy research on this, I put a couple of volumes out called The Kids Go to Work. They just went out of print. We're revising and updating them. One was called Cruel and Unusual Punishment, which is the title of my talk tonight. The other one was called Sales Kids, all right? Thinking of these children as nothing but unpaid salespeople for this organization. In my first lecture on the Jehovah's Witnesses and child custody matters and the endangerment issues, I said, without the young people, the Watchtower dies. I want to reach those kids, and I want to reach them on television, all right? Because that's the media today for people. That is the place where people go for their answers. Most people don't even read newspapers very well today. It's the TV. And so I was pleased that in 1992, we were able to go on a program called 60 Minutes with some of my cases. Now, I don't know if you get 60 Minutes. Do they get 60 Minutes in England? Maybe not. They do. Okay. Okay, all right. It's the largest news show in the United States. I find it interesting is that it aired right after Freddie Franz, who's the third president of the fourth president of the Jehovah's Witnesses, died. If he didn't die, then he probably would have killed him anyway, from what he saw on that program, because it was pretty hard stuff. My clients were being accused of homosexuality, and even one of the psychiatrists who had been hired by one of my clients was accused of child molestation by the Watchtower organization. So this is how far they will go in their situation to defend themselves. In 1988, the Watchtower or the Awake magazine published "Child Custody: A Painful Issue," which dedicated about half the magazine to child custody issues, trying to put a good face on the Jehovah's Witness lifestyle. And it really was the first time since the 40s, late 40s, that they had really written about children issues in this way. And about this time, we started what we call Danger at Your Door, which is a tract which we've distributed now and given the permission for numerous counter-cult ministries, and most of them do have their own Danger at Your Door tract, to distribute through the neighborhoods worldwide. And I'm sure that we're talking about it must be must be well over 1 million of these have been. I'm sure we've published hundreds of thousands of them ourselves. And along with it, probably the most preventive medicine that we could ever come up with, a little sticker which says, "No visits by Jehovah's Witnesses, please." All right? So for about a nickel or so, U.S., an entire family, 4, 5, 6 people, including several children, would be protected from the Watchtower cult with that sticker on the door. And I know it works. In fact, the Watchtower's been so upset about it, they've written about it a couple of times. So these things do work. I'm not going to predict. I'll leave that to the prophets in Brooklyn to make predictions, but I do believe that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is in for the biggest fight it's ever had. I think we're just beginning on this, because now we've got something that is a tool that makes everything I've been talking about before look small potatoes. And that tool's called the Internet. All right? And that means that with anybody with a gripe or info or whatever on this particular issue can get it out to literally thousands of people, maybe even more. All right? And it can be quite a chorus. And I do know from talking to tons of attorneys and judges and psychiatrists and psychologists and teachers of all stripes over the last 15 years or so that I've been doing this, that it's the kid issue that gets to the heart of the person, as we all were. Right? And many of us, if we've been Jehovah's Witnesses, had messed up lives because of it. All right? Failed aspirations. We just didn't quite, it just didn't come together for us. And whether it's the Watchtower Society that is fully to blame for that, I can't say. But in general, it usually had something to do with it, particularly in the low self-esteem area. So people care about kids more than they care about adults. And so when you see the face of a child, or several faces on an Awake magazine, kids who have died, been slaughtered in essence, by the blood transfusion policy of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, that hits the heart. All right? And that's what I'm talking about. So put those faces on the Internet. Bring the stories out more and more. It's happening. It's happening. And all you got to do is punch in blood transfusions, and you're going to find an enormous amount of helpful material on the Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusions.
Can you bring up some Bible quotation about blood transfusions?
Well, I'm not going to be talking much about the biblical issues right now. I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow. Right now we're going to talk about child custody issues, though, and mostly I do not bring a Bible into court with me. All right? I'm an evangelical Christian. I believe in God, but if I was to bring in a Bible and try to prove biblically that some of the lifestyle issues of Jehovah's Witnesses were wrong or harmful to the child, I would be exited out of that courtroom real fast, I'll tell you. And not only that, but the watchtower would notice that because they're always there when I'm there. And the next time I walked into a courtroom, when I was questioned, they'd ask me about the courtroom. I got kicked out with a Bible in my hand. All right? The only time you deal with the Bible is when you put your hand on it and raise your right hand and swear on that Bible. That's when you use it in the courtroom. Unfortunately, it is not a place to preach, although I am tempted. Believe me, many times. In all this, I've noticed a very typical situation, all right, or Jehovah Witness. And they haven't the foggiest idea. And mostly they do know something about blood transfusions, perhaps something about saluting the flag. You know, that's about it. And how all this fits, they're not sure, and they need some help. Praise God, they come to the right place for that. We are happy to at least give them some information, and perhaps work on the case, depending on the situation. You get a mental health person, a psychologist or a psychiatrist involved in the case, and most of the time we have them, about 90% of the cases. And I can counsel with that person, and I can give them direction as to the types of questions they may want to entertain to ask, probing type questions. Of course, they ask them the way they want to ask them, but the point is, we're going to get the information we want. They're going to find out very quickly that they've got people who don't want to talk about their lifestyle, or they'll skirt issues. And so this is extremely helpful. Probably the most important thing that's helpful in child custody cases is what we call depositions. Now, in the United States and in Canada, a deposition is a testimony of a witness which is taken under oath, but it's not in the courtroom. It's generally in an attorney's office. And that's the reason, for the reason that either side in the case can work out what they call discovery of what kinds of things the other side knows and what kinds of things they'll be testifying about. It's a great place to ask the best kinds of questions you can possibly come up with, because when you get into a court situation, sometimes you don't have the time to ask as many probing questions as you'd like. I've had depositions that last 3 days on a person. So I get what I want at the end of that deposition. I know exactly where that witness stands. And if that person wants to skirt or lie, particularly about what they said in the deposition, we have it in transcript. And in most of my cases now, I videotape the depositions. So I can actually play the videotape in the court. And judges are just like anybody else. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So you'll often find in these cases that judges are very, very impressed with what a Jehovah's Witness has said during a deposition. And I think if I counted them up, you're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 really great cover-ups or lies. I like to be blunt about various facts, misstatements of facts in the typical deposition. So you can imagine, the powerful adjunct you have to your case when you have a transcript of several hundred pages that you can bring in your questioning on all the issues that we have discussed. I'm not saying a Jehovah's Witness, when they're undergoing the depositions or in the general courtroom, are evil people or generally liars or whatnot, but they are in a tight squeeze here. They are not in there alone. They are the defender of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. They are the champions for the moment, if you will. So consequently, they're on the hot seat. And they have to say to themselves, well, what would the Watchtower want me to say? See? Even though this may be true, do I really want to answer it in the most factual, straightforward manner if it brings discredit upon the organization which I love and cherish, and may I say worship? And they generally will say, no, I don't want to do that, so what can I do to skirt this thing? Well, understand that they're not only sitting across from an attorney who I've prepared. Most of the time, they're sitting across from yours truly. All right? So they're sitting across from an A-plus apostate. All right? Somebody they can't stand, that they wouldn't walk on the same street with. They wouldn't be in the same town with if they could help it. All right? But here I am, a few inches from their face, handing notes constantly to the attorney. Now, you can imagine how they feel. I'm going to give you an example of that. This person you're going to see on video, I did a deposition on a few months ago. She was a very strong-willed person. I think you'll find it interesting. What happens in depositions over and over and over again. That was about 10 minutes of cuts, I think, out of about an 8 to 9 hour deposition on this woman. It was by no means the more interesting parts, because some of the more interesting parts lasted for several minutes and I can't show them to you because of the shortness of my lecture. But just to let you know that that was not an unusual situation. This lady truly believed in the organization to the point where if you mispronounced it, you were on. She was not going to send you any Christmas cards, that's for sure. That's when they change. That's when they change the doctrine, of course. New light. About half of my cases, my client has custody. And the concern of the client is the estrangement that between him or herself with the child due to the visitation process of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And because, as we know, it's not really just a Jehovah's Witness parent. It's a Jehovah's Witness parent and an entire congregation and an entire Watchtower apparatus that is trying to undermine the non-Jehovah's Witness parenting of this child. So I'll get calls from people who have won custody, and they're going nuts. They're having real problems being undermined during the visitation process. The children, many of these kids, particularly the younger ones, say from age around 4 to 8 or 9, many of them are having nightmares in the extreme sometimes about demons destroying them at Armageddon, these kinds of terrible things. I have heard this over and over again so that I could almost write a book just on that alone. So that is a sad factor, and it certainly wouldn't be there unless we are dealing with a doomsday operation called the Watchtower Organization. One of the tricks that Watchtower attorneys or attorneys that are being aided by the Watchtower Organization will use is to ask a non-Jehovah's Witness parent on the stand if the witness parent is a good parent. And usually, people like to be nice, so many people would like to say, well, if it wasn't for this other, she or he is a good parent. Wrong. You don't want to say that. You don't want to say that on the stand. You'd say, well, Duane, aren't you saying, well, that makes you look hard and unreasonable and so forth? No. The whole reason for you being in that courtroom is to show that this parent is not only a bad parent, but a totally unfit parent. All right? So that you can put restrictions upon them bringing the child to the Kingdom Hall or knocking on doors or, in fact, the whole package. That's generally what we try to attempt to do, to show the court that if, in fact, the religion was not alienating the non-witness parent who has custody from the child, there wouldn't be a problem. We wouldn't be here. All right? So that is something that is happening over and over again. Bottom line is that the Watchtower organization has a policy of teaching the child during the time the child is at the Kingdom Hall and in the realm of the Jehovah's Witnesses to hate the non-witness parent. And you say, wow, hate? Now, come on, that's really taking it to the extreme. Well, if the child sees that non-witness parent as standing between the child and everlasting life, standing between the child and paradise, standing between the child and God, standing between the child and all right, because the non-witness parent is a pagan. The non-witness parent is in the world, and the non-witness parent is under Satan. And a child, particularly a young child, doesn't have the ability to bring it any higher than hate. See? He has to put it where he can handle it. So he will not say, yes, I hate you, Daddy, or I hate you, Mommy, but he will start alienating himself as though he can't stand that parent. I'm going to give you an example of that. This is a letter that was sent by little Lita. Lita's, I think she was about 7 years old. Dear Mommy, now her mother does not have custody. And by the way, I was not involved in this case to award custody so that the custody was awarded to the father. All right? But I can tell you that in 9 times out of 10, unless you fight really hard and have a fair judge, the mother's going to get custody. All right? It's almost going to happen 100% of the time. So the fact she didn't get custody tells you something, right away. But anyway, this is, Dear Mommy, I love you. I miss you so much. S-O-O-O, much. How are you? How is Ritz? Is he still a brat? Do you like the new TV? Tell Jan and Danny thanks for the letter. Tell him I enjoy it a lot. Mom, now I can play piano even better. Thank you for the long letter and the crystal. I got new clothes last Saturday. They're cute. Sounds okay so far, huh? Mommy, I celebrated Halloween. I'm so scared you won't get me now. I want Jehovah to give me one more chance so I can do it. Mommy, I'm so scared. Jehovah won't love me anymore. Exclamation point. What should I do? I said a long, long prayer to Jehovah. Mommy, I know that you trusted in me. I'm so sorry. I know you're disappointed in me. I'm disappointed in me too. Exclamation point. Mommy, please forgive me. I'm sorry. I feel like I can't even see you because I feel like I've committed a crime. 7-year-old kid, right? And I have. I do have a terrible conscience on me now. You know what? Darby and Duane don't have a conscience like I do. Mommy, please love me. Can I start fresh, new, like a baby being born, so that we can forget about the things I've done? It's Halloween. Mommy, I'm so scared. You want to know how it happened? Well, I was going to tell you right after school, but he was not here, so I didn't. I know I have no excuse. I know that was dumb of me, but please forgive me. Letter back to Lita from Mommy. My sweet Lita, she was not age 7, she's age 11, must be accurate. My sweet Lita, your letters have brought me much joy. Jim and I also feel our home is incomplete without you and your sisters. What helps me cope sometimes is just to do things in your room, like painting, making pillows, and already starting a quilt. In your letter, you said that sometimes you feel like giving up. I can understand how you feel. The paradise earth is soon to be realized, baby. Don't lose faith. There's a couple little things at the end of it, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't pertain. In all these things, I always got to keep in mind, Duane, you're a human being. You got a heart too, okay? If I can't identify with these kids, and if I can't identify with the pain and so forth, I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. If I go in there by rote, just because there's some academic issues to deal with, I'm going to be doing it wrong. And I think that reading a letter like that every once in a while is really the crucial thing for me. And better than that, though, is when I see these kids released from this bondage, and I can sit down and I can hug them. That makes my week. That makes my month, you see. And there's been many, many, many situations like that, about 100. Okay, so I'm so excited about that. Christina's children are a good example. I wrote some notes on them. The kids, Stephanie and Matthew, 9 and 11, the mother said, look, I'm going nuts. The kids just want to be Jehovah's Witnesses. This paradise thing is too big. I just can't handle it anymore. And I said, well, show them the video. Jehovah's Witnesses, a non-profit organization. Kids get caught up in videos. All right, it's really hard to give little 9 and 11-year-olds lectures and deal with a lot of hard documentation and all that stuff. Just show them the video. Well, it took 2.5 hours to go through this 1-hour video here. And they didn't want to see it at first. In fact, they stopped it several times as they finally got into it and started asking questions. Now, that's a good sign. They were particularly interested, particularly Matthew, was about the dates. In fact, he calls up a friend right after the video and starts telling him how many times Armageddon happened. All right? So he was fascinated about that. After the video, the kids didn't want to be Jehovah's Witnesses anymore. Matthew said, it's like I was living in a jar. All right, he's put his hands up like this. He says, it's like I'm living in a jar, and now I'm out and I can move my arms. That was the way he expressed it. He says, I was all cramped up. And he said, I want to be a Boy Scout. Stephanie, first thing she wanted to do was have a birthday party. And I think her birthday was like 6 months away or something like that. But I think they arranged it. But she says, what do I wear? She was so excited. She says, I wear a skirt. What do I wear? She was excited. 3 days after the video, the kids saw a court-appointed counselor who was to determine, just like perhaps a psychologist would at its court-appointed, who should have custody in the case. He'd already known about the kids. He'd already known that they wanted to be Jehovah's Witnesses. Now he was going to see kids who were bubbly, excited, and didn't want to be Jehovah's Witnesses anymore because they sat down for a couple hours and watched a video. I wish it was that easy in child custody matters. It's not. But that was extremely helpful. The problem that we see in a number of counter-cult ministries, and after all, this conference here deals with counter-cult, dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses particularly, and how we deal with them, is that I don't think there's enough emphasis on the social issues. I really don't. And don't get me wrong, if I was to spend time on issues, it would be theological issues, because that's where my heart is, and that's where I enjoy. I spend most of my time on that, as a matter of fact, writing and researching and dialoguing and so forth. But if you're going to make headway with the world, out there, people who are not theologically trained and interested even in Jesus, again, they're interested in kids and kids being exploited. So that's, again, where the internet comes in and can be extremely, extremely helpful to us. But again, it's a matter of ignorance. There's about 2,000 cases going on at any one time. 2,000 cases. That's a lot of people getting divorced, and it's a lot of kids getting harmed by the Jehovah's Witness lifestyle. And the biggest problem is attorneys and parents haven't the foggiest idea where to go. Hopefully that'll be resolved over time with the internet. Just punching in the name Jehovah's Witnesses ought to do it eventually. I think that court is a highly visible place to get the truth across. I can't tell you how many interviews I've done over the last 15, 20 years on these type of issues. Newspapers of all types, TV shows, and all radio programs particularly are interested in plugging in this particular subject. I'm going to end with this challenge from a judge. And I think he says it best. His name was Rutherford. If the message Jehovah's Witnesses are bringing to the people is true, then it is of greatest importance to mankind. If it is false, then it is the duty of the clergymen and others who support them to come boldly forward and plainly tell the people wherein the message is false. I've taken up that. You do likewise. Praise God.